Good afternoon, children. Hope you all are fine. Today we will be learning the fourth chapter of the textbook Vistas, The Enemy. Okay. As I have told you earlier, this chapter is based on the World War II. Okay. It's the time of the World War. An American prisoner of war is washed ashore in a dying state and is found at the doorstep of a Japanese doctor. Should he save him as a doctor or hand him over to the army as a patriot? Okay, children, so the chapter is confronting a question. Okay, as the World War is going on, what happens? An American prisoner of war is getting washed ashore and he is in a dying state and he is found at the doorstep of a Japanese doctor. Okay, children, so as you know, in the World War II, Japan and America were in the opposite sections. Okay, they fought each other in the World War. Should he save him as a doctor or hand him over to the army as a patriot? Okay, children, so what is the question that comes in the mind of that Japanese doctor? Should he save that American prisoner or hand him to the army? Okay, so let's see what happens. Whether he saves the prisoner or he is handed over to the army. Dr. Sadawa Hoki's house was built on a spot of the Japanese coast where, as a little boy, he had often played. The low, square stone house was set upon rocks well above a narrow beach that was outlined with bent pines. As a boy, Sadawo had climbed the pines, supporting himself on his bare feet, as he had seen men do in the South Seas when they climbed for coconuts. His father had taken him often to the islands of those seas, and never had he failed to say to the little brave boy at his side, "Those islands yonder, they are the stepping stones to the future for Japan." "Where shall we step from them?" Sadao had asked seriously. "Who knows?" his father had answered. "Who can limit our future? It depends on what we make it." So that one fine evening, what happened? We have the Japanese doctor, Dr. Sadawa Hoki, whose house was built on a spot of the Japanese coast, okay? Near the seashore, the Sadawa Hoki's house was built and it was a low square stone house. Okay, why the stone house was made of stone? Because it was near the seashore and it is out to be so strong, okay? And so Sadavo is recollecting the days he had with his father, his childhood days, and he remembered his father saying to the by seeing the stone which was laid in the seashore that those were the stepping stones to the future for Japan. Okay, and he also, as a small boy, used to wonder where those stones would take them. And he also remembers how he climbed the pines and he played a lot in this seashore. Sadavo had taken this into his mind as he did everything his father said. His father, who never jogged or played with him, but who spent infinitive pains upon him who was his only son. Sadavo knew that his education was his father's chief concern. For this reason, he had been sent at 22 to America to learn all that could be learned of surgery and medicine. He had come back at 30, and before his father died, he had seen Sadao become famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist because he was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean. He had not been sent abroad with the troops, although he knew there was some slight danger that the old general might need an operation for a condition for which he was now being treated medically. And for this possibility, Sadao was being kept in Japan. Okay, so now what happened is that Sadao used to grasp everything that his father used to tell him because his father was a man who never jogged or played with him. Okay, he was someone who took a lot of pains to bring up his only son, and Sadavo knew that his education was his father's chief concern. So what happens is that at the age of 22, Sadavo was sent to America, okay, and he learned about surgery and medicine. And he came back at the age of 30. And before his father died, he became famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist also, because he made a perfect discovery of a medicine which will clean the wounds entirely. And now, as I told you, the World War was going on, but still, Sadavo was not sent along with the military troops, okay? Because there was an old general who may need the help of this Japanese Dr. Sadavo anytime because he was in a very critical condition. Clouds were rising from the ocean now. The unexpected warmth of the past few days had at night drawn heavy fog from the cold waves. Sadavo watched mist hide outlines of a little island near the shore and then come creeping up the beach below the house. Wrapping around the pines in a few minutes, fog would be wrapped about the house too. Then he would go into the room where Hannah, his wife, would be waiting for him with the two children. Okay, so that now we have an explanation, a description about the weather. And it was a very chilling cold out there. It was very cloudy. Okay, and at any time there can be fog arising. And he wished to return to his room where his wife, Hannah. So, children, what's the name of his wife? Hannah will be waiting for him with the two children. So, Sadavo is having two children as well. But at this moment the door opened and she looked out, a dark blue woolen Harry, over her kimono. She came to him affectionately and put her arm through his as he stood, smiled, and said nothing. He had met Hannah in America, but he had waited to fall in love with her until he was sure she was Japanese. His father would never have received her unless she had been pure in her race. He wondered often whom he would have married if he had not met Hannah, and by what luck he had found her in the most casual way, by chance literally, at an American professor's house. The professor and his wife had been kind people, anxious to do something for their few foreign students, and the students, though bored, had accepted this kindness. Sadao had often told Hannah how nearly he had not gone to Professor Harley's house that night. So what happens is that when he was thinking about going back to his room, at that moment itself he is seeing the door getting opened and she is coming in a hurry. Okay, actually it's a loose outer garment worn over the kimono, and kimono is a long loose Japanese robe having wide sleeves and tied with a sash. Okay, so she is coming to him very affectionately and she is putting her arm and she is showing her love and affection for him. And now, at this moment, Sadavo is recollecting how he met Hannah in America, and he was really waiting to propose her to know that she was a Japanese. Otherwise, his father wouldn't agree to such a marriage if the girl is not a Japanese. Okay, and he also remembers an American professor who was very much affectionate to the foreign students as well. Okay, children, now we have a reference to the rooms of that American professor's house in which these foreign students used to live. Okay, the rooms were so small, the food so bad, the professor's wife so voluble. Okay, but he had gone and there he had found Hannah, a new student, and had felt he would love her if it were at all possible. Now he felt her hand on his arm and was aware of the pleasure it gave him. Even though they had been married years enough to have the two children, for they had not married heedlessly in America. They had finished their work at school and had come home to Japan. When his father had seen her, the marriage had been arranged. The marriage had been arranged in the old Japanese way. Although Sadao and Hana had talked everything over beforehand, they were perfectly happy. She laid her cheek against his arm. It was at this moment that both of them saw something black come out of the mist. It was a man. He was flung up out of the ocean, flung, it seemed, to his feet by a breaker. He staggered a few steps, his body outlined against the mist, his arms above his head. Then the cold mist hit him again. Okay, children, so they were quite having a very lovely moment. Okay, and even though they had married, that they have two children, maybe their marriage is of 4 years of age now. Now, what happens is that they are still very fresh in her love to each other. And now we have a very small reference to the rooms in which he stayed in America. The rooms were so small and the food was so bad. And the professor's wife was a lady who used to talk with a lot of enthusiasm. Okay. And when he was living in that place only, he found Hannah. Okay. And she was a new student who joined there. And he is thinking that if he was not living in that American professor's house, then it wouldn't have been possible to meet Hannah as well. It is not that it was a very typical love marriage. They came to the native place. He expressed his wish to his father, and the father gave him consent. Then only they got married. Okay, so they were very good in their studies. They had kept aside all this love and affection, and now they are very happy, successful couple. Okay, now what happened when they were very happy and all of a sudden they are hearing some sounds, okay, if something was coming out of that mist and all, okay, and it showed that it was the form and shape of a man, okay, and who is that? Hannah cried. She dropped Sadavo's arm and they both leaned over the railing of the veranda. Now they saw him again. The man was on his hands and knees crawling. Then they saw him fall on his face and lie there. A fisherman, perhaps, Sadavo said, washed from his boat. He ran quickly down the steps, and behind him Hannah came, her white sleeves flying. A mile or two away on either side, there were fishing villages, but here was only the bare and lonely coast, dangerous with rocks. The surf beyond the beach was spiked with rocks. Somehow the man had managed to come through them. He must be badly torn. Now, what happened? Actually, that was a man, and Hannah was worried who it will be. Okay, a man who was coming out of the mist and all, a very total stranger. And Sadavo is calming her down by saying that he will be a fisherman. Okay, maybe he fell off from the boat and all. And Sadavo was rushing towards the point, the location where they found that man. They saw when they came toward him that indeed it was so. The sand on one side of him had already a stain of red soaking through. He is wounded, Sadava exclaimed. He made haste to the man who lay motionless, his face in the sand, an old cap stuck to his head soaked with sea water. He was in wet rags of garments. Sadava stopped, Hannah at his side, and turned the man's head. They saw the face, a white man, Hannah whispered. Now, what happened? No, actually, they were moving towards the man and they were trying to lift him up, okay, because the man was badly wounded and there was a stain of reddish color in his body. And when they looked at his face, she saw that it's a white man. Okay, what do you mean by white man, children? That means he is an American, okay. Yes, it was a white man. The wet cap fell away, and there was his wet yellow hair, long as though for many weeks it had not been cut, and upon his young and tortured face was a rough yellow beard. He was unconscious and knew nothing they did for him. Now Sadavo remembered the wound, and with his expert fingers he began to search for it. Blood flowed freshly at his touch. On the right side of his lower back, Sadavo saw that a gun wound had been reopened. The flesh was blackened with powder. Sometime, not many days ago, the man had been shot and had not been tended. It was bad chance that the rock had struck the wound. Oh, how he is bleeding, Hannah whispered, again in a solemn voice. The mist screened them now completely, and at this time of day no one came by. The fisherman had gone home, and even the chance beach campers would have considered the day at an end. Okay, now what happened is that regarding the wound and all, as a Japanese doctor, Dr. Sadao, he was looking for the wound and he was able to realize that the wound was very fresh, and actually the wound was very much deepened by striking at a stone also at the seashore, and he realized that he was very much bleeding from that wound, and Hana was also very much concerned for that man. Okay, so nobody was there other than the Sadavo's family. The fisherman had gone home, and the beachcomber. What do you mean by beachcomber, children? A person who walks along beaches collecting interesting, valuable things. Okay, that is what you mean by a beachcomber. Okay, so they made sure that nobody is watching them, and they are thinking about what they should do with this man. He packed the wound with the sea moss that strewed the beach. The man moaned with pain in his stupor, but he did not awaken. The best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea, Sadavo said, answering himself. Now that the bleeding was stopped for the moment, he stood up and dusted the sand from his hands. Yes, undoubtedly that would be best, Hannah said steadily. But she continued to stare down at the motionless man. If we sheltered a white man in our house, we should be arrested, and if we turned him over as a prisoner, he would certainly die, Sadavo said. Okay, now the question comes whether to save this prisoner or to hand him over to the army. So, in the beginning, Sadavo feels that it is better to hand him over to the army. And Hana is also agreeing to this idea of Sadavo. But later, Sadavo recollects that he will certainly die if he is handed over to the army people. The kindest thing would be to put him back into the sea, Hannah said. But neither of them moved. They were staring with a curious repulsion upon the inert figure. What is he? Hannah whispered. There is something about him that looks American, Sadavo said. He took up the battered cap. Yes, there almost gone was faint lettering. A sailor, he said, from an American warship. He spelled it out, U.S. Navy. The man was a prisoner of war. He has escaped, Hannah cried softly, and that is why he is wounded. In the back, Sadava agreed. They hesitated, looking at each other. Then Hannah said with resolution, Come, are we able to put him back into the sea? If I am able, are you? Sadavo asked. Now, what happens is that so the kindest thing would be to put him back into the sea. So Hana is of the opinion that it will be so kind of you to put him back into the sea. Okay, and now Sadavo is checking him up to find out whether he's an American or not, and they are finding a cap in which it was titled U.S. Navy, and they understood that he was a prisoner of war and he escaped from there. That's why the wound was on the backside. He was hit with a bullet shot in the backside. Okay, and Sadav is asking her if he is willing to throw him into the sea, will she be able to do it also? Sadavo hesitated. Come, are we able to put him back into the sea? If I am able, are you? Sadavo asked. No, Hannah said, but if you can do it alone. Sadavo hesitated again. The strange thing is, he said, that if the man were whole, I could turn him over to the police without difficulty. I care nothing for him. He is my enemy. All Americans are my enemy. And he is only a common fellow. You see how foolish his face is. But since he is wounded, you also cannot throw him back to the sea, Hannah said. Then there is only one thing to do. We must carry him into the house. But the servants. Now both of them are seen arguing each other, okay? Hannah is asking Sadavo to throw him into the sea, while Sadavo is not able to do it all alone by himself. And he is even saying that he hates Americans, but he found it a very helpless situation. Now Hannah said that if you cannot throw him back to the sea, then we must carry him to the house. But both of them are worried about the reaction of the servants. We must simply tell them that we intend to give him to the police, as indeed we must, Sadao. We must think of the children and your position. It would endanger all of us if we did not give this man over as a prisoner. Certainly, Sadava agreed. I would not think of doing anything else. So what happens is that Hannah says that we should make it clear to the servants that we are just saving his life, and then they will be handing it over to the army. Okay. This agreed, together they lifted the man. He was very light like a fowl that had been half starved for a long time, until it is only feathers and skeleton. So his arms hanging, they carried him up the steps and into the side door of the house. This door opened into a passage, and down the passage they carried the man towards an empty bedroom. It had been the bedroom of Sadavo's father, and since his death it had not been used. They laid the man on the deeply matted floor. Everything here had been Japanese to please the old man, who would never in his own home sit on a chair or sleep in a foreign bed. Hannah went to the wall cupboards and slid back a door and took out a soft quilt. She hesitated. The quilt was covered with flowered silk and the lining was pure white silk. He's so dirty, she murmured in distress. Now, what happens is that they are carrying him to the room in which Sadao's father used to live before he died, and the room was full of Japanese things. And Hana is feeling distressed when she took the dress for him and all because he was so dirty, and she hated to make her room dirt. Yes, he had better be washed, Sadaba agreed. If you will fetch hot water, I will wash him. I cannot bear for you to touch him, she said. We shall have to tell the servants he is here. I will tell Yumi now. She can leave the children for a few minutes and she can wash him. Sadava considered a moment. Let it be so, he agreed. You tell Yumi and I will tell the others. But the utter pallor of the man's unconscious face moved him first to stoop and feel his pulse. It was faint, but it was there. He put his hand against the man's cold breast. The heart, too, was yet alive. He will die unless he is operated on, Sadavo said, considering. The question is whether he will not die anyway. Hannah cried out in fear. Don't try to save him. What if he should live? But what if he should die? Sadavo replied. Now, what happened is that Sadava also agrees that he is very dirt, and he suggests to wash him with hot water. And Hana is saying that she will ask the servants to do so. And she is mentioning one servant here, Yumi. And Sadavo is very much worried by the paleness, by the yellow color of the man's face. And he is taking his pulse, and he says that he should be operated at the earliest, otherwise he will die. Now Hana is of an important question, what he is going to do if he is saved alive.